It was the casual cruelty of it that struck me first. The words weren't shouted, they were tossed over a shoulder, wrapped in a chuckle, meant only for them. But I heard them. In the cavernous, sun-drenched lobby of the Golden Palms Resort, a mother always hears. "Thank God," my eldest son, Michael, said, his voice dripping with performative relief as he herded his wife and brother toward the gleaming brass elevators. Finally free of the babysitting, quote. His brother, Daniel, snorted in agreement. "Tell me about it. I need a drink." Or 5. The laughter that followed was a bright, sharp sound, like glass shattering on the cool marble floor. It echoed off the potted palms and the gentle splash of the indoor fountain, a sound of pure, unadulterated freedom. Their freedom. From me. My hand, holding a small, worn leather handbag, grew cold. The blood rushed in my ears, a dull, roaring wave that drowned out the cheerful resort music. I stood frozen, a 65-year-old woman from Ohio, suddenly invisible in the middle of a lobby buzzing with life. They didn't look back. Not once. They just peeled away, a tight, happy unit, their designer luggage gliding silently behind them, their backs turned to the woman who had made this entire moment possible. The secret burned behind my ribs, a hot, heavy coal of truth. They didn't know. They had no idea that the polished marble they were walking on, the fragrant lilies scenting the air, the 5 family suites waiting for them upstairs, all of it was paid for. Not by them. Not with the Venmo transfers they had so casually promised. It was paid for by me. It was paid for with the last beautiful thing my late husband, Richard, ever gave me. It was paid for with hundreds of early mornings spent kneading dough, the scent of cinnamon and apples clinging to my clothes from the pies I sold at the Saturday farmers market. It was paid for with a lowered thermostat in the dead of an Ohio winter and long walks to the grocery store to save on gas. It was paid for with sacrifices they would never see, all for a dream they were currently mocking. The dream of one last, perfect family vacation. A story like this, about the lines we draw and the moments that force us to finally draw them, can feel deeply personal. It's a story of how a quiet life can hide a deep well of strength. But before we continue, make sure you've subscribed to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching this video from. We're really happy to know that our stories have reached people everywhere. Watching their retreating forms, I felt a familiar ache settle in my chest, the one I'd learned to live with for years. It was the ache of being useful but not wanted. The reliable cook at Thanksgiving, the emergency babysitter on a Friday night, the quiet provider of loans that were never really loans. I was the foundation they all stood on, and like any foundation, I was meant to be sturdy, silent, and completely out of sight. For a moment, the sheer weight of it threatened to buckle my knees. The sting of tears pricked at the back of my eyes. It would have been so easy to let them fall, to crumble right there in the lobby and play the part of the wounded, aging mother they already saw me as. That's what they expected. A few tears, a quiet dinner in my room, and then I'd be back tomorrow, smiling and asking if anyone needed their laundry done. Compliant. Forgiving, easy. But as I watched the elevator doors slide shut, swallowing my family whole, something inside me shifted. The part of me that had spent decades absorbing small slights, swallowing hurt feelings, and making excuses for their casual indifference, that part of me went still. It didn't break. It hardened. It turned from something soft and yielding into a piece of cold, unshakable granite. I took a slow, deliberate breath. The air still smelled of salt and flowers, but it felt different now. Sharper. Clearer. My hand, still clutching my purse, was steady. My face, I imagined, was a mask of calm. They thought they had left the babysitter behind in the lobby. They thought the rest of this vacation was theirs to enjoy, on their terms, funded by my quiet, invisible labor. I promised myself, standing there alone amid the happy, oblivious families, that this trip would not end the way they expected. It would end the way I decided. The keycards in my hand felt as heavy as tombstones. Each one was a small, plastic monument to a hope I had allowed myself to nurture, a hope that had just been machine-gunned down in a hail of casual, whispered insults. Standing there in the echoing grandeur of the Golden Palms lobby, the cold clarity that had settled over me began to sharpen the edges of the past. It all came rushing back not as a warm memory, but as evidence in a long, silent trial where I was finally both the judge and the star witness. It all started with a phone call, 6 weeks ago. A Tuesday. I remember because I had just pulled a tray of lemon meringue pies from the oven, the sweet, sharp scent filling my small apartment. Tuesdays were for baking, for the Saturday farmers market. It was a rhythm I had built for myself after Robert passed, a way to measure my days in something other than silence. My life had become a quiet loop of familiar tasks, small comforts, and the vast, empty spaces in between. The phone buzzed on the counter, rattling against a stray dusting of flour. I saw the name and a familiar, Pavlovian warmth spread through my chest. Michael. I wiped my hands on my apron before answering, as if he could see the flour on my fingertips through the phone. Hi, sweetheart. Mom, he began, and I heard it instantly. That voice, that honeyed, careful tone he reserved for exactly 2 situations, when he was about to deliver bad news, or when he was about to ask for a favor. It was a smooth, polished sound, sanded down of any genuine emotion, designed to slide past your defenses before you even knew you were being approached. It was the same voice he'd used at 13 to ask for a later curfew, the same one he'd used at 24 when he needed a down payment for his first car. It was a voice that had cost me a small fortune over the years. But this time, it felt different. Or maybe I just wanted it to. How are you doing? He asked, the question so broad and empty it was meaningless. He didn't wait for a real answer. Listen, Jess and I were talking with Daniel and Lauren the other night, and we had an idea. It's been too long. We were thinking, Mom, let's do a big family vacation, like we used to. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow, knocking the cynicism right out of me. Like we used to. The phrase was a key, unlocking a dusty room in my heart I thought I'd sealed off for good. It conjured images of road trips in the old station wagon, of sandy sandwiches on a beach towel, of the kids sticky with melted ice cream, their laughter echoing in the summer air. In those memories, I was essential. I was the sun around which their small orbits turned. I was the one who packed the bags, remembered the sunscreen, kissed the scraped knees, and made sure Robert had his newspaper and coffee every morning. I was the engine of the family, humming quietly in the background, indispensable. For the past decade, that engine had been sputtering. Ever since Robert was gone, my role had been downgraded. I was no longer the matriarch, I was a utility. I was the free babysitter summoned at a moment's notice. I was the holiday caterer, expected to produce a Thanksgiving feast for 15 people in a kitchen designed for 2, only to be left with a mountain of dishes while the rest of them watched football in the other room. At Christmas, I'd spend weeks knitting sweaters for the grandkids that would be met with a polite, vacant thanks, Grandma, before being tossed aside for the latest electronic gadget. I had become a function, not a person. My presence was tolerated, my labor assumed. To be invited, to be wanted, to be seen not as Grandma the babysitter but as Mom. It was a glass of water offered to a woman dying of thirst. I drank it down without checking for poison. Oh, Michael, I breathed, leaning against the counter. The warmth was no longer just in my chest, it was behind my eyes. That sounds wonderful. Great, he said, his voice instantly brighter, the deal seemingly sealed. We were thinking Florida, Clearwater Beach. The Golden Palms Resort looks amazing, the kids would love it. He had it all planned out. Of course he did. He hadn't called for my opinion, he'd called for my compliance. The old, cynical part of me tried to whisper a warning, but the longing was too loud. I saw it all. A week of sunshine, of dinners where we all sat at the same table, of watching the little ones build sandcastles. A week of feeling like a family again. A week where I mattered. And then came the hook, coated in that same, Sweet honey. It's just, with all of us trying to coordinate, it's a nightmare, he said with a practiced sigh. You've always been so good at organizing these things. Could you make the booking for everyone? It would be so much easier if it all came from one person. We'll Venmo you after. There it was. The casual, almost thoughtless, final sentence. We'll Venmo you after. It reframed the entire conversation. This wasn't an invitation, it was a delegation. I wasn't being asked to join them, I was being asked to facilitate for them. The beautiful, inclusive we, he had used so masterfully. We had an idea, let's do a big family vacation, evaporated, leaving behind a stark and lonely you. Could you make the booking? The silence stretched for a beat too long. I should have said something. I should have said, why don't we all get on a conference call with the hotel? I should have said, send me your credit card numbers. I should have said, no. But he didn't. Because the beautiful lie he was selling was more appealing than the lonely truth I was living. The image of that vacation, the one where I was included and cherished, was already taking root in my mind. It was a powerful fantasy, and I was a willing participant in my own deception. I clung to the like we used to and chose to ignore the we'll Venmo you after. Of course, sweetheart, I heard myself say, my voice sounding distant. I can handle that. The relief in his voice was immediate and palpable. You're the best, Mom. Seriously. Send me the details when you have them. I've gotta run, Liam's got soccer. Love you. The line went dead. I stood in my silent, flour-dusted kitchen, the phone still pressed to my ear. The sweet smell of the lemon pies suddenly seemed cloying, artificial. Love you. 3 words deployed like a punctuation mark, a neat little bow tied on the end of a transaction. I pulled up the Golden Palms Resort website on my old laptop. It was all their gleaming pools, white sand, smiling families posed in what the marketing department called sun-kissed moments. It looked like a paradise. It looked like everything I had been missing. It looked expensive. My fingers, moving with a will of their own, clicked through the booking process. 1 suite for Michael, Jessica, and their 2 kids. 1 for my son Daniel, his wife, and their daughter, Maya. 1 for Lauren and her husband. 1 for the 2 older, college-aged grandkids to share. And 1 for me. 5 family suites, full board. The numbers on the screen climbed at an alarming rate. I looked at the total, and my breath hitched. Then I looked at the picture on the mantelpiece. Robert and me, 20 years younger, standing on a beach not unlike this one. He always used to say, you can't take it with you, Helen. He always believed in making memories. But this wasn't about making memories. Not really, it was about buying them. It was about paying a steep price for a ticket to a show where I wasn't even guaranteed a good seat. I knew, even then, as I typed in my credit card number to pay the deposit, that no one would ever Venmo me. I knew it in the same deep, marrow-level part of me that knew the sun would rise in the east. They would forget. They would get busy. It would become awkward, and I, in the interest of keeping the peace, would never bring it up. The memory dissolved, leaving me back in the sterile, air-conditioned chill of the present. The lobby felt different now. It was no longer a place of betrayal, but a stage. The warm, foolish woman who made that phone call 6 weeks ago was gone. The woman standing here now understood the transaction perfectly. She had the receipt. And she was about to change the terms of the deal. After Michael hung up, I stood in the kitchen for a long time, the phone still warm in my hand. The sweet, hopeful scent of the lemon meringue pies had been replaced by something acrid, the phantom smell of a transaction I hadn't fully understood until it was over. We'll Venmo you after. The words had been a gentle anesthetic, and now, in the silence of my apartment, the numbness was wearing off, revealing the clean, sharp line of the incision. I walked over to my laptop, its screen still glowing with the idyllic images of the Golden Palms Resort. A paradise for sale. I had closed the booking page, but my browser history held the evidence of my momentary fantasy. I clicked the link again. There it was, the cost of being seen, the price tag of being wanted. 5 family suites, full board, for 6 nights. The number at the bottom of the screen seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. $4,200. $4,200. I whispered the number aloud to the empty room. It sounded like a foreign language. It was more than I spent on groceries, utilities, and all other living expenses in 3 months. It was a figure that belonged to a different life, a different woman, a woman who didn't have to carefully portion out the small pension Robert had left her. A woman whose social security check wasn't the financial highlight of her month. A large, red banner across the top of the booking summary clarified the immediate terms. A 50% deposit is required to confirm your reservation. 50%. $2,100. My heart didn't sink, it simply stopped for a moment, a stalled engine. I pushed away from the table and walked to the small secretary desk where I kept my finances. I pulled out the checkbook, the bank statements. The numbers were neat, tidy, and brutally honest. My savings account, the one I painstakingly fed with $20 or $30 whenever I could, held just over $800. My checking account, after paying the month's bills, was hovering around $300. The math was simple. The math was impossible. A wave of cold, pragmatic despair washed over me. I could call Michael back. I could say, "I'm sorry, sweetheart, but I can't float a $2,000 deposit. You'll all have to book your own rooms." I could almost hear the result. The carefully constructed enthusiasm in his voice would curdle into sighs of frustration. He wouldn't be angry at me, not overtly. He would be angry at the inconvenience, the complication. The beautiful, simple idea of a family trip would become a logistical headache, and I would be the source of that headache. The invitation would be rescinded, not with words, but with a slow, collective fizzle. The trip wouldn't happen. And I would go back to being the woman who complicated things, the woman who couldn't just go with the flow. I would go back to my quiet kitchen, my lonely holidays, and the heavy silence of being an afterthought. The beautiful lie was still more tempting than the ugly truth. My eyes scanned the small apartment, a museum of my quiet life. What did I have? The furniture was old but comfortable, worthless to anyone but me. The silver tea set from my wedding was plated, not sterling. The paintings on the wall were prints, not originals. There was nothing here of monetary value, nothing that could be liquidated into a memory. Except one thing. My gaze fell upon my left hand, resting on the worn ledger book. The light from the window caught the simple, warm gleam of the gold band on my ring finger. 42 years it had been there. I could still feel the weight of Robert's nervous, slightly clumsy hand as he slipped it on. It was a part of me. The skin underneath was paler than the rest, a permanent ghost of the vow it represented. It had been with me through the birth of 3 children, through job losses and promotions, through the terrifying night Robert had his first heart attack and the impossibly quiet morning after he was gone. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was the entire library of my adult life, condensed into a single, unbroken circle. The thought, when it first appeared, was so monstrous I shoved it away. No, not that. But it returned, persistent and practical. What was it, really? A symbol, a piece of the past. Robert was gone. The love it represented was no longer a living, breathing thing. It was a memory. And what are memories for, if not to fuel the present? Wasn't I trying to build new memories with the family I had left? The logic was perverse, but it was all I had. I was being asked to trade the symbol of a true, unconditional love for the chance to purchase a week of a fragile, conditional one. The next morning, I did something I never thought I would do. I walked into a jewelry store in downtown Columbus, the kind of place with harsh lighting and a quiet, vaguely predatory hum. A man with slicked back hair and eyes that assessed my worth in a single glance motioned me toward a velvet-top counter. "How can I help you?" he asked, his smile not reaching his eyes. My mouth was dry. I felt a flush of shame creep up my neck. I felt like a failure, a woman who couldn't manage her life, a widow selling off the scraps of her past. But then I thought of Michael's voice, of the phrase "like we used to," and the shame was replaced by a grim, painful resolve. I held out my left hand. "I'd like to sell this." The words felt like a betrayal. He took my hand with a professional detachment that was somehow more violating than anything else. He slid the ring off my finger. It was a motion that Robert had only ever done once, playfully, when we were young. From this stranger, it felt like an amputation. My finger was instantly cold. Naked. He placed the ring on a small digital scale. He squinted at it through a loupe. He tapped a few numbers into a calculator. The entire process took less than a minute. My entire 42-year marriage, my entire history as a wife and partner, was appraised in 60 seconds. "It's a classic piece," he said, as if commenting on the weather. 14-karat gold. Not much weight to it. "I can offer you $950. How?" The amount was both an insult and a lifeline. It was a pittance for what the ring meant, but it was nearly half of the deposit I needed. I swallowed. "I'll take it." He disappeared into a back room and returned with a small envelope containing 19 crisp $50 bills. He counted them out on the velvet pad, the sound of the rustling paper filling the sterile silence of the shop. I slid the money into my purse, the sharp corners of the bills a poor substitute for the smooth, familiar curve of the ring. I walked out of the store without looking back, my left hand feeling unnervingly light. Back at home, I went to the cookie jar on top of the refrigerator. It wasn't filled with cookies. It was filled with cash. My bake sale money. Every Tuesday, I baked. Every Saturday morning, from May through October, I sat at a small folding table at the farmer's market, selling my pies. Lemon meringue, apple crumble, chocolate silk. People said I had a gift. They paid in crumpled 5s and 10s, and I'd smooth them out and put them in this jar. It was my money. Earned by my own hands, my own skill. It was my independence fund, my buffer against the unexpected. It was the product of hundreds of hours of work, of waking up at 4 a.m. to roll out dough, of standing in the summer heat with a smile on my face. I dumped the contents onto the kitchen table. The pile of worn bills smelled of sugar and cinnamon and the faint, earthy scent of the market. I counted it. $785. The cash from the jeweler. The money from my pies. The savings I had. I put it all together. It was more than enough for the deposit. It was a collage of my sacrifices. I sat back down at the laptop. The glowing screen of the Golden Palms Resort seemed to mock me. This time, there was no hesitation. My fingers moved across the keyboard with a cold, mechanical precision. I typed in my credit card number. It was the anchor, the guarantee. The reservation, the entire booking, would be under my name. Every meal, every incidental, every charge would flow through me. I was not just the facilitator, I was the bank. I clicked the button that said confirm reservation. Hunt. A moment later, an email popped into my inbox. Your Florida vacation is confirmed. I stared at the screen, at the cheerful, exclamation-pointed subject line. I had done it. I had purchased the fantasy. I had paid the price of admission. The confirmation wasn't just for a hotel, it was a confirmation of my role. I was the silent, invisible provider. I looked at my bare left hand. The ghost of my ring was a pale, stark reminder of the true cost. This vacation wasn't a gift from my children to our family. It was a gift from my past to their present. And as I sat there, in the quiet of my apartment, I made a silent promise to Robert's memory. I would see this through. But the price I had just paid demanded more than just a seat at the table. It demanded respect. It demanded a place in the sun. And one way or another, I was going to collect. The confirmation email sat in my inbox, a glowing testament to my folly. Your Florida vacation is confirmed, it chirped, the digital equivalent of a pat on the head. I had paid the deposit. I had secured the fantasy. But the victory felt as hollow and brittle as a bird's egg. The remaining balance, another $2,100, loomed over me, a second, steeper mountain to climb. The hotel's policy was clear: full payment was due 7 days prior to arrival. I had 5 weeks. The world outside my window began its slow, gray slide into an Ohio winter. The vibrant greens of late summer faded to a tired olive, then to a brittle brown. As the temperature dropped outside, it dropped inside, too. The first and most immediate sacrifice was the thermostat. It was a small thing, a matter of a few degrees, but it became the central metaphor for my life in those weeks. My apartment, once a warm, cozy refuge, became a place of strategic layering. I wore my thickest wool sweater over a long-sleeved shirt. I resurrected the old Afghanistan Robert's mother had knitted decades ago, its fibers smelling of mothballs and memory, and kept it draped over my shoulders as I moved from room to room. In the mornings, I could sometimes see my breath as I made coffee. The warmth of the mug in my hands was the only heat that felt truly mine. Every shiver, every time I rubbed my arms for warmth, was a silent, resentful contribution to the Florida Fund. I was siphoning the comfort from my own life to fuel the sunshine-soaked comfort of theirs. My old Singer sewing machine, which had sat dormant under a plastic cover for years, was dragged out and set up on the kitchen table. It hummed back to life with a familiar, comforting whir. I put a small, handwritten sign in the window of the local laundromat. Alterations and mending. Quick. Reliable. Reasonable. The calls started trickling in. A broken zipper on a winter coat. A set of curtains that needed hemming. A bridesmaid's dress that was 2 inches too long. I bent over the needle night after night, the small lamp casting a pool of yellow light on the fabric. My eyesight wasn't what it used to be, and I had to squint to guide the seams straight. Each garment told a stranger's story. I let out the waist on a young man's first interview suit, a silent prayer for his success stitched into the seams. I patched the knee of a little boy's favorite jeans, imagining his mother's relieved smile. I was mending the fabric of other people's lives for $5, $10, $20 at a time, while the fabric of my own family felt like it was unraveling in my hands. The work was honest, but the motivation was bitter. Every dollar I earned was another brick in the wall I was building around my heart. The small efficiencies multiplied. I stopped buying the good coffee and switched to the store brand. I ate vegetable soup for dinner 4 nights a week. The Uber app on my phone went untouched. My world, which had already felt small, shrank even further, reduced to the radius I could comfortably walk. I'd walk the 1.5 miles to the grocery store, my canvas bags digging into my shoulders on the way back, the Ohio wind biting at my cheeks. I remember one particular afternoon, caught in a cold, spitting rain, huddled under the flimsy awning of a bus stop. I could have called for a car. $7, that's all it would have been. But $7 was 2 zippers. It was half a hem, it was a tangible piece of the vacation. So I waited, shivering, my hair damp and cold against my neck, watching the cars swish by, their occupants warm and dry. I was living a life of deliberate, chosen hardship, all for a week of sunshine I was beginning to dread. Throughout this period of quiet austerity, my phone would buzz with an almost cruel regularity. It was them, my children. Their texts were never inquiries, they were directives, cloaked in the casual language of entitlement. A message from Michael would pop up. "Hey Mom, can you resend the resort confirmation? Jess says she can't find it." I would stop what I was doing, pinning a hem, stirring a pot of soup, and dutifully forward the email. My fingers would type the reply. "Of course, sweetheart. Here it is." My mind, however, would scream, "It's the same confirmation I sent you 3 weeks ago. The one you didn't bother to save. The one you're not paying for." A text from my daughter, Lauren. "Does the big restaurant there have a dress code? Need to know if I have to pack heels. Also, are we all on the same floor?" My reply, "The restaurant is resort casual, but heels would be lovely. I requested adjoining suites if possible. The unspoken truth. I don't know, Lauren, I've never been there. I'm just the woman who is paying for you to worry about your footwear. The worst were from Jessica, Michael's wife. Her messages were masterpieces of passive selfishness. Helen, does the hotel have one of those kids' clubs? Mike and I were hoping for at least 1 or 2 dinners by ourselves. You understand. You understand. It wasn't a question. It was a command. It meant, you are the grandmother. Your function is to facilitate our parental relief. You will watch the kids so we can have a date night on the vacation you're funding. My reply, yes, they have a wonderful kids program. I'll look into the hours for you. Each message was a small, sharp twist of the knife. They were planning their vacation, fine-tuning the logistics of their leisure, without a single thought for the person making it all possible. They asked for details about the pool, the restaurants, the room service menu. They debated what to pack and which excursions to take. But in all those weeks, in all those dozens of messages, not one of them ever contained the words I was waiting for. Not once did anyone ask, "Mom, how much do we owe you?" The question never came. It was a ghost, a void, an absence so profound it became a physical presence in the room with me. Their silence on the matter was a deafening roar. They didn't forget to ask. They chose not to. They had handed me a task, and with it, the implicit understanding that I would handle the financial burden, just as I had handled every other unspoken family burden for the past 30 years. The honeyed invitation from Michael had been nothing more than a purchase order, and I was the vendor. The night before our departure, the final bill was due. The email from the Golden Palms Resort sat, unopened, for an hour. I walked around my now chilly apartment, my sanctuary of sacrifice. My sewing machine was quiet, a stack of finished alterations waiting for pickup. My purse held the cash from my final farmer's market of the season. My suitcase, a shabby old thing I'd had for 20 years, was packed with a few simple sundresses and a paperback novel. I finally sat down at the laptop. My hands were steady. The hurt that had churned in my gut for weeks had cooled and hardened into something else. Something cold and heavy, like steel. I opened the email. There it was, the remaining balance, $2,100. I pulled out my credit card. The plastic was worn, the numbers faded from use. I thought of my wedding ring, of its warm, solid weight. I thought of the tired ache in my back from hours of sewing, of the damp chill in my bones from that afternoon waiting for the bus. All of it had been converted into this moment. This final transaction. My fingers typed the familiar 16 digits. There was no joy in it. No anticipation. This wasn't an act of generosity. It was an act of grim necessity. It was the final step in a plan that was no longer about a family vacation. It was about drawing a line. I clicked, submit payment. The screen refreshed, showing a zero balance. Paid in full. I closed the laptop. The deal was done. The trap was set. It had been baited with my hope, built with my sacrifices, and paid for with the last of my illusions. They thought they were flying south for a week of free sunshine. They had no idea they were flying into a reckoning. The morning air was thin and sharp, carrying the metallic scent of an impending Ohio snow. It was the kind of cold that felt personal, a final, spiteful slap from a season that had overstayed its welcome. Inside my apartment, however, I had manufactured a different climate. I stood before the small mirror in my hallway, the pale blue summer dress a defiant splash of color against the gray light filtering through the window. It was a simple dress, made of a light, crinkled cotton. I had bought it specifically for this trip, an act of pure, unadulterated hope. Blue, the color of clear skies and calm seas. It was the color of the woman I wanted to be for the next week. Serene, happy, a beloved matriarch basking in the warmth of her family. As I smoothed the fabric over my hips, I wasn't just getting dressed. I was putting on a costume, trying to inhabit a role I desperately wanted to be real. The woman in this dress was not the tired, lonely widow who spent her nights mending strangers' clothes. She was a mother on her way to a grand family vacation. The hope was a fragile, flickering thing, but it was there. Perhaps the car ride, I told myself, would be the start. Hours together, a captive audience. A chance to bridge the distance that had grown between us, a chasm I had been trying to fill with pies and patched jeans and unconditional, unreciprocated love. The buzz of my doorbell was sharp and impatient. I took one last look in the mirror, straightened my shoulders, and pasted on a bright, welcoming smile. It was showtime. Michael stood on the doorstep, his phone already in his hand. "Hey, Mom, ready? Traffic's looking okay on the interstate." He didn't step inside. He didn't offer a hug. His words were pure logistics, a human checklist. Jessica was still in the SUV, a sleek, black behemoth that seemed to take up my entire parking lot. I could see the glow of her phone screen illuminating her face, even in the morning light. She offered a tight, brief wave through the windshield without looking up. "All set," I chirped, my voice a little too high, a little too cheerful. Michael grabbed my shabby suitcase. It looked pitiful next to their gleaming, hard-shelled luggage and tossed it into the back. The thud it made was dull and final. I slid into the back seat, the cold leather a shock through the thin cotton of my dress. The interior of the car smelled of nothing, a sterile, climate-controlled bubble, meticulously scrubbed of any personality. My two grandchildren, Liam and Sophie, were already plugged in. Liam, who was 12, wore a massive headset, his eyes glued to a frantic, flashing game on a tablet propped on his knees. 7-year-old Sophie was watching a cartoon, the tinny, high-pitched dialogue a faint buzz in the otherwise silent car. They both mumbled a hi, grandma without taking their eyes off their screens. And then we were moving. My small apartment building, my whole tiny world, shrank in the rearview mirror and disappeared. For the first 20 minutes, the only sounds were the hum of the tires on the pavement and the relentless, quiet tapping of Jessica's nails on her phone screen. Tap. Tap. Scroll. Tap. It was a maddening, digital Morse code for "I am not here. Do not engage." I couldn't bear it. The silence was a physical weight, pressing in on me. The old Helen, the peacekeeper, felt the compulsive urge to fill it. "Oh, look," I said, pointing out the window as we passed Miller's Pond. "Remember that, Michael? You and your father used to fish there every summer. You must have been about Liam's age when you caught that huge catfish and were so proud you made me take a picture of it." It was a bid for connection, a carefully chosen memory meant to be a bridge. Michael's eyes flickered to the rearview mirror for a fraction of a second. He grunted, his attention already back on the road. It wasn't a reply. It was a sound designed to close a conversation. Jessica didn't respond at all. She was fully immersed in the glowing rectangle in her hand, her thumb moving with a hypnotic, practiced rhythm. A small, self-satisfied smile played on her lips as she looked at something, a picture, a comment, a life that was more interesting than the one happening inside this car. The silence returned, heavier this time, freighted with the weight of my failed attempt. I waited. 10 miles. 20. The landscape blurred into a monotonous ribbon of gray highway and skeletal trees. My hope, which had felt so bright and defiant in my apartment, began to feel foolish. The blue dress seemed flimsy, inadequate armor against this impenetrable wall of indifference. I tried again. A new tactic. General interest. "So, Jessica," I said, my voice sounding strained to my own ears. "Are you excited for the beach? I read that the sand in Clearwater is almost pure quartz. They say it's as fine as sugar." This time, she did look up. Not at me, but in the vague direction of the back seat, her eyes unfocused. She gave a small, noncommittal shrug, a gesture that conveyed a universe of disinterest. "It'll be nice to get some sun," she said, her voice flat. And with that, her duty was done. Her gaze dropped back to her phone, and she was gone again, transported back to a world where I did not exist. The shrug was more brutal than an insult. An insult would have been an engagement, a sign that my words had at least registered. The shrug was a dismissal. It said, "Your attempt at conversation is a minor annoyance, and I am expending the absolute minimum amount of energy required to make it stop." I looked at my grandchildren, my last hope. "Sophie, honey, what are you watching?" I asked, leaning forward slightly. She pulled one earbud out, her expression annoyed, as if I had interrupted something of vital importance. "Pony princesses," she mumbled, and immediately plugged her ear again. The conversation was over. I felt a hot flush of shame. I was a stranger in this car. A piece of talking luggage in the back seat. They weren't a family traveling together. They were three separate units: Michael the driver, Jessica the passenger, the children the cargo, and I was a foreign object that had been temporarily introduced into their ecosystem. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window and watched the world go by. And I stopped hoping. The decision was not conscious. It was a quiet, internal surrender. The part of me that had spent a lifetime trying, smoothing, placating, and filling silences simply gave up. It laid down its tools and walked off the job. And in its place, a profound and startling quiet settled in my mind. For the first time, I wasn't trying to get their attention. I was just observing. I saw the way Michael's knuckles were white as he gripped the steering wheel, his jaw tight. Was he stressed, annoyed, or just empty? He drove with a grim efficiency, his destination a point on a map, not a shared experience. I saw the way Jessica held her phone, like it was a lifeline. She wasn't just scrolling, she was curating. She took a picture of the back of Liam's head, the tablet glowing in front of him, and I watched her type a caption. "Road trip vibes. So ready for some family time." The lie was so audacious, so bald-faced, it was almost impressive. She was manufacturing a memory for her online audience that had no basis in the reality of this sterile, silent car. She was performing a version of our family that didn't exist. I saw my grandchildren, lost in their digital worlds, learning from their parents that the people right next to them were less interesting than the pixels on a screen. They were being taught, by example, the art of the micro-dismissal. The hours passed. We stopped once for gas and fast food. We ate in the car. The rustling of greasy paper bags was the most intimate sound we had shared all day. No one suggested we sit inside. No one asked me what I wanted. Michael just handed back a lukewarm burger and a paper cup of water. I ate it, my stomach churning. As we crossed the Florida state line, the landscape began to change. The skeletal trees of Ohio gave way to hardy pines, and then, finally, the first scraggly palm trees. The air, even through the car's filtration system, seemed to get softer, thicker. Jessica finally put her phone down. "Oh, thank God," she said to no one in particular. "I need a cocktail." It was the most honest thing she had said all day. I looked down at my pale blue dress. It was creased and wrinkled from the long hours of sitting. It no longer looked hopeful. It looked tired. It looked like a lie. I smoothed the fabric over my knees, not with the cheerful optimism of the morning, but with a quiet, final resolve. The road trip hadn't been a bridge. It had been a confirmation. It was the last piece of evidence I needed, submitted to the jury of one sitting in my mind. The verdict was in. It was unanimous. When we finally pulled into the long, palm-lined driveway of the Golden Palms Resort, I felt nothing. Not excitement. Not relief. Just a cold, clear sense of purpose. Michael turned to me, a flicker of something: annoyance? Obligation? In his eyes. "Well, we're here," he said. "Yes," I replied, my voice even and calm. "You are." The moment the SUV door opened, the air changed. It was no longer the sterile, recycled atmosphere of the car, it was a physical presence. A thick, warm, salt-laden blanket of air that smelled of blooming flowers, hot asphalt, and the vast, living ocean just beyond the horizon. For a second, the sheer sensory shock of it, the sudden warmth on my skin, the cry of a distant gull, the rustle of a dozen palm fronds in the breeze threatened to overwhelm the cold resolve I had nurtured for the past 800 miles. This was the promise. This was the paradise I had paid for. The Golden Palms Resort was not merely beautiful. It was an exercise in weaponized perfection. The driveway curved around a central fountain where water danced and glittered in the afternoon sun. Bellhops in crisp, white uniforms moved with a silent, practiced efficiency. The architecture was a monument to aspirational leisure, gleaming white stucco, terracotta roof tiles, and vast expanses of glass that reflected the impossible blue of the Florida sky. It was an orchestrated fantasy, a stage set for the performance of happiness. As Michael killed the engine, the performance began. "Whoa," Liam said, finally pulling off his headset, his eyes wide. "This place is sick. Dead." Sophie was already trying to unbuckle her seatbelt, chanting, "Pool, pool, pool." Jessica stepped out of the car, stretching like a cat. She slid her sunglasses on, her gaze sweeping across the grand entrance with a critical, appraising eye. "Well," she pronounced, a note of grudging approval in her voice, "at least the pictures weren't a lie." It was the closest thing to a compliment I had received all day, and it wasn't directed at me, but at the resort itself, as if she were a judge and it had just passed its first inspection. Michael was already in logistical mode, barking orders at a bellhop who had materialized beside the car. "We've got 5 rooms under Parker. Just get the bags. We'll handle the check-in." He didn't ask me for the reservation number or the confirmation. He simply assumed the role of the man in charge, the patriarch of this sprawling, expensive vacation. They flowed out of the car and toward the enormous glass doors of the lobby, a chaotic tide of luggage and restless children, pulling me along in their wake. The moment we stepped inside, a wave of cool, lily-scented air washed over us. The lobby was even more magnificent from the inside. A vaulted ceiling soared 2 stories high. A marble floor gleamed under a chandelier that looked like a captured star. Through a wall of glass at the far end, I could see it. The turquoise water of the pool, the white slash of the beach, and the endless, shimmering expanse of the Gulf of Mexico. This was the moment, the grand reveal. The payoff for every shiver in my cold apartment, for every late night bent over my sewing machine, for the phantom weight of the ring that was no longer on my finger. This was the moment I was supposed to see their faces light up with a shared, familial joy. The moment we were all supposed to turn to each other and say, without words, "This is it. We're here. Together." I turned, my carefully rehearsed smile in place, ready to share the moment. But they weren't looking at me, they weren't looking at each other. They were looking at everything else. Michael was striding toward the check-in desk, his shoulders back, the king of a castle he didn't know he hadn't paid for. Jessica was pointing at a bronze sculpture near the fountain, whispering something to Lauren, who had just arrived with her own family in a separate car. The younger grandkids were making a beeline for the massive fish tank that flanked one wall. My son Daniel was trying to corral them, looking stressed and distracted. The shared moment never materialized. It was a stillborn hope. They had not arrived together, they had simply arrived at the same location. They scattered like billiard balls after a hard break, each careening off in their own direction, following their own trajectory of self-interest. A quiet, familiar ache started in my chest. It was the old Helen trying to surface, the ghost of the woman who would have scurried around, trying to gather her flock, trying to manufacture a moment of unity where none existed. But the new Helen simply stood still. She watched. She observed. I let them go. I watched Michael reach the front desk, speak with an air of authority to the young woman behind the counter, and then frown when she asked for his name again. I saw his brief confusion, the slight falter in his confident posture, as she scanned her screen. I walked toward the desk, my steps measured and unhurried. As I approached, the young woman's face lit up with a professional, welcoming smile. "Mrs. Parker?" she asked, her eyes finding me as if by instinct. "Welcome to the Golden Palms." Quote. Michael turned, a flicker of annoyance on his face. "Oh, Mom. It's under your name?" "Yes, sweetheart," I said, my voice calm and even. It was just easier that way. The lie was smooth, practiced. It was the kind of lie that had lubricated our family dynamics for years, a small, selfless falsehood designed to make things easier for them and, by extension, for me. "Right," he said, already losing interest. He gestured vaguely toward the seating area where the rest of the family was beginning to congregate. "Well, just get the keys and let's get settled." And then he walked away. He left me at the counter, a chore to be completed. The young woman, whose name tag read Chloe, gave me a discreet, sympathetic smile. "It's a big group," she said kindly. "Can get a little hectic." "It can," I agreed. She tapped a few keys on her computer. "Okay, Mrs. Parker, I have you all set. 5 family suites, full board, for 6 nights. The reservation is paid in full." She looked up from her screen. "Everything is under your name, and we have your credit card on file for any incidentals. Will you be needing anything else?" Her words were simple, professional. But to me, they were a coronation. "Everything is under your name." The phrase echoed in the vast, quiet space that had opened up inside me. It was the confirmation of my power, the validation of my leverage. I was not a passenger on this trip. I was the pilot. "Just the key cards, thank you, Chloe," I said. She slid a small, elegant portfolio across the polished granite counter. Inside were 5 plastic key cards, each nestled in its own sleeve, with the room numbers neatly printed. I signed the registration form, my signature no longer the shaky scrawl of a nervous old woman, but a firm, deliberate mark. I took the portfolio. The weight of the 5 cards was negligible, but in that moment, they felt as heavy and significant as bars of gold. They were my leverage. They were my control. I stood there for a second, my back to the lobby. The old Helen had one last, dying wish. She wanted to turn around, to walk over to her family, and to perform the role of the benevolent matriarch. She wanted to hand out the keys with a smile, to be the source of their access to this paradise. "Here you go, Michael, room 801. Lauren, you're in 802, right next door." To be, for a moment, the hero of the story. I took a slow breath, turned around, the portfolio held in my hand. And the lobby was empty. Not completely empty, of course. There were other families, strangers laughing, their children chasing each other around the fountain. But my family, my sprawling, chaotic, ungrateful brood, was gone. The seating area where they had gathered was deserted. A half-finished juice box sat sweating on a side table, the only evidence they had ever been there. I scanned the vast space. I looked toward the elevators. I looked toward the glass doors leading to the pool. Nothing. They had vanished. They had not waited. They had not lingered for the woman who had organized, booked, and single-handedly funded their entire existence for the next week. They had simply moved on, assuming, correctly, that I would handle the tedious details and eventually find my own way. The coldness that had been settling in my bones for weeks finally solidified, becoming something dense and unbreakable. The last flicker of the old Helen was extinguished. The betrayal was so complete, so casual, it was almost elegant in its simplicity. It wasn't malicious, it was worse. It was thoughtless. It was the ultimate proof that I was not a person to them. I was a function, and my function checking in had been completed. There was no need to wait for the tool to catch up. I stood alone in the center of the magnificent, sun-drenched lobby, holding 5 keycards to 5 empty rooms. The sound of the fountain, which had seemed so cheerful just moments before, now sounded like mocking laughter. They went ahead. The voice was quiet, hesitant. I turned. It was my granddaughter, Maya. Daniel's daughter, 17 years old, with her father's kind eyes and a quiet watchfulness that the rest of the family lacked. She stood a few feet away, a paperback book clutched in her hand, her expression a mixture of apology and awkwardness. She hadn't vanished with the others. She had waited. My dad told them you had it covered, she said, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. They wanted to see the pool. I looked at this girl, this lone holdout in the family's great vanishing act. There was no artifice in her, no hidden agenda. She was just there. Thank you for waiting, Maya, I said, and I was surprised by the genuine warmth in my own voice. She gave a small, shy smile. It's no problem, Grandma. In that moment, a new, unforeseen possibility emerged from the wreckage of my expectations. A plan began to form, not just of defense, but of something more, and it started with the quiet, observant girl standing in front of me. She was a witness, and perhaps, just perhaps, she could be an ally. My granddaughter's presence was an unexpected anchor in the swirling vortex of my anger and disappointment. Everyone else had evaporated, pulled away by the gravity of their own selfish desires, but Maya had remained. She stood there, a quiet island of consideration in an ocean of indifference, her posture radiating an awkward sympathy that felt more genuine than any effusive declaration of love I had received in years. Well, I said, forcing a brightness into my voice that felt brittle and thin. I suppose we should find our rooms. They can't have gotten far without these. I held up the portfolio of keycards, a small, weak attempt at a joke. Maya didn't smile. Her eyes, which were a deep, thoughtful brown just like her father's, were fixed on me with an intensity that was unnerving. She seemed to see past the chipper grandma costume, past the pale blue dress, and directly into the cold, hard knot of fury that was forming in my gut. Grandma, she began, her voice barely a whisper. She glanced around the bustling lobby, as if afraid of being overheard. There's something you should know. The tone of her voice, the conspiratorial urgency in her eyes, sent a prickle of unease down my spine. This wasn't just a teenager making small talk. This was a warning. What is it, dear? I asked, keeping my own voice low. She bit her lip, a gesture of indecision that made her look much younger than 17. She clutched her phone in her hand, her thumb hovering over the screen. It's the group chat. The family chat? I asked, confused. I was in the family chat. It was a stream of banal updates, blurry photos of the grandkids, and relentless requests for my zucchini bread recipe. I saw your mom's post about getting to the airport this morning. Quote. Maya shook her head, a quick, sharp gesture of negation. No, not that one, the other one. The word hung in the air between us. Other. A cold dread, far more chilling than the lobby's air conditioning, began to seep into my bones. I had spent the last 800 miles cataloging their casual dismissals, their thoughtless snubs. But this felt different. This felt intentional. This felt like a betrayal that was organized, codified, and deliberate. I don't understand, I said, though a dark, terrible part of me already did. Maya's thumb tapped her screen. She took a deep breath, like a diver about to plunge into icy water, and then she held her phone out to me. They made it the day Uncle Michael called you about the trip, she said, her voice flat with a shame that was not her own. They didn't add me at first. They forgot I'm not a little kid anymore. But Uncle Michael added me last week so I would get the real updates. I don't think they realized I would. Her voice trailed off. I don't think they realized I would have a conscience. I took the phone from her. Her hand was trembling slightly. The screen was open to a messaging thread. The name at the top of the chat made my stomach clench into a tight, painful knot. No drama vacation. The hypocrisy was so stunning, so breathtakingly audacious, it almost made me laugh. They were the drama, they were a walking, talking, endlessly demanding vortex of it. The name was a preemptive strike, a way to frame me as the problem, the source of some imagined conflict they needed to manage and contain. My eyes scanned the first few messages, my heart beginning to beat a slow, heavy drum against my ribs. Michael, okay, everyone's in. First rule of no drama vacation, what mom doesn't know won't hurt her. Let's keep this thread for actual planning. Jessica, thank you. Can we agree on no guilt trips about family time? I need at least one day at the spa and a dinner without having to hear that story about the catfish again. A wave of dizziness washed over me. The catfish. The story I had told in the car, my pathetic little olive branch. She hadn't just ignored it. She had registered it, catalogued it, and brought it here to be mocked. I scrolled. My hands were surprisingly steady, my mind entering a state of hyper-focused, clinical detachment. I was no longer a mother reading about her children. I was an investigator examining evidence. The messages were a litany of my insignificance. They were a blueprint for my erasure. Lauren, does she have to eat with us every night? David and I were hoping for a few date nights. Daniel, Maya's father, come on, guys, let's not be mean. She's footing the bill, remember? My breath hitched, so they knew. Of course they knew. Daniel's message wasn't a defense of me, it was a pragmatic reminder. Don't bite the hand that feeds you. At least not until after the meal is served. Michael's reply was instant and dismissive. Michael, she's not footing the bill. She's booking it. Big difference. We'll pay her back. It's just easier to have one card on file. The lie was there, in black and white, for all of them to see. It was the official narrative, the collective delusion they had all agreed to endorse. We'll pay her back. And no one, not even Daniel, had challenged it. They had all silently, tacitly agreed to participate in the fiction. But that wasn't the worst of it. The deeper I scrolled, the colder my blood ran. The plan wasn't just to ignore me. It was to use me, exhaust my utility, and then discard me with the bill. Jessica, speaking of the bill, I have an idea. The reservation is in her name, right? What if, on the last day, we all go to the front desk and have them shift our rooms over to our cards? We can just say there was a mix-up. Then we check out, and she's left with just her room charge. She'll probably just pay it without making a scene. She always does. She always does. The 4 words hit me with the force of a physical punch. It was a perfect, crystalline summary of my entire life as their mother. Helen, the path of least resistance. Helen, the woman who would absorb any cost, any insult, any injustice, just to avoid a confrontation. They had built their entire plan on a foundation of my learned weakness. They had studied me, not as a person they loved, but as an opponent whose patterns they had memorized. They were counting on my silence. They were banking on my desire to keep the peace. My thumb swiped up, moving faster now, a desperate, morbid curiosity pulling me deeper into the sewer of their intentions. Michael, that's genius, Jess. We can even leave a day early if we want. Tell her we have a work emergency. Once our rooms are off her account, it's not our problem. The hotel will have to deal with her. Lauren, oh my God, yes. We could be home by Friday night. David would love that. I felt a sudden, urgent need to sit down. My knees felt weak. I looked over at Maya. Her face was pale, her eyes filled with a profound, vicarious shame. She knew what I was reading. She had seen it all. Grandma, she whispered. I held up a hand to silence her, my gaze still locked on the screen. There was more, there was always more. The public family chat, the one I was on, was a carefully curated performance. A message would appear there. Thanks so much for organizing this, Mom. We're all so excited. And almost simultaneously, a message would appear in the no drama thread. Okay, just did my public thank you for the day. So, for the beach tomorrow, is everyone good with meeting at 10 and just not telling her where we're going? It was all there. A meticulously documented conspiracy of disrespect. Every smile, every thank you, every kind word they had offered me in the past 6 weeks had been a lie, a strategic move in a game I hadn't even known I was playing. I finally reached the end of the messages. I stood there, in the middle of the glittering lobby, the happy chatter of other families buzzing around me like flies. I was holding a poison dart in my hand, a digital testament to the fact that my own children saw me not as their mother, but as a problem to be managed, a resource to be exploited, and a liability to be discarded. The old Helen would have crumbled. She would have handed the phone back to Maya, fled to her room, and dissolved into a puddle of silent, heartbroken tears. She would have spent the entire vacation in a state of wounded misery, fulfilling their prophecy of being the source of all drama. She would have let them win. But the woman standing in the lobby of the Golden Palms Resort was not the old Helen. She was a woman who had sold her wedding ring, shivered in her own apartment, and mended strangers' clothes to fund her own execution. The hurt was there, a deep, seismic shock. But beneath the hurt, something else was rising. It was a cold, clarifying rage. A rage so pure and so powerful it burned away every last vestige of weakness. I did not cry. I did not collapse. My first thought was not of my pain, but of my purse. Inside it was the file folder. The folder where I had obsessively, methodically, kept everything. The original booking confirmation. The receipt for the deposit. The final, paid in full invoice. My credit card statements. The receipt from the jeweler in Columbus. My mind started working with a speed and clarity that surprised me. I handed the phone back to Maya. My hands, I noticed with a strange sense of detachment, were perfectly steady. Maya, I said, and my voice was not the quavering whisper of a victim. It was low, calm, and imbued with a new, unfamiliar authority. I need you to do something for me. I need you to go through this entire thread and take a screenshot of every single message. Can you do that? She nodded, her eyes wide. Send them to my phone, and then, I want you to delete this conversation from your mind. This is not your burden to carry. This is mine to handle. I looked at her, this girl who had shown me the truth, and I felt a surge of protective love that was fierce and absolute. You did the right thing, Maya. You are a good person. Don't you ever let them make you feel otherwise. I took the portfolio of key cards. I took out one for myself and one for Maya. I handed her the key to her suite. Go get settled, I said. I have some things to take care of. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded and walked toward the elevators, leaving me alone once more. But this time, I was not the victim left behind. I was the general, standing on a battlefield I now fully understood, holding a complete map of the enemy's plans. The public family thread sent cutesy thank yous. The secret thread kept plotting. And I, Helen Parker, had just become a spy in my own life. They had made a critical error. They had underestimated their opponent. And their no-drama vacation was about to become the most dramatic week of their lives. After Maya disappeared into the elevator, I stood motionless for a full minute, the portfolio containing the remaining keycards clutched in my hand. The glittering, sun-drenched lobby, with its laughing strangers and tinkling fountain, seemed to recede, the sounds blurring into a dull, distant roar. The world had tilted on its axis. The ground beneath my feet, which I had always assumed was solid, had revealed itself to be a trapdoor, and I was staring down into the abyss. The initial shock, the visceral, gut punch of reading those messages, was beginning to subside. It was like the moment after a serious injury, a brief, surreal period of numbness before the pain rushes in. I could feel the pain waiting for me. It was a vast, black ocean of it, threatening to drown me. The betrayal wasn't just about the money. It was about the mockery, the casual cruelty, the story about the catfish, the calculated performance of affection. They hadn't just plotted to steal from me, they had plotted to humiliate me, to render my love and my memories into a punchline. They had taken 40 years of my life as their mother and deemed it worthless, an inconvenience to be managed. The old Helen would have waded into that ocean of pain and let it pull her under. She would have gone to her room, locked the door, and surrendered to the grief. She would have become the weepy, dramatic, difficult woman they had already decided she was. She would have fulfilled their prophecy. But the woman standing there was not her. That woman was gone, burned away by the cold, white-hot fury that was now rising to take the pain's place. Rage, I discovered in that moment, is a powerful anesthetic. It cauterizes the wound. It provides a strange, terrible clarity. I did not go to my room to cry. I went to my room to work. My suite, 803, was beautiful. A small balcony overlooked the ocean. The furniture was elegant, the bed was enormous, and a complimentary bowl of fruit sat on the table, a pathetic, corporate welcome. I ignored all of it. I walked past the balcony, past the beckoning view of the turquoise water, and set my purse and the keycard portfolio on the desk. My hands moved with a calm, deliberate purpose. My heart was a cold, steady metronome in my chest. There was no panic, no hysteria, just a profound and unshakable sense of mission. First, the documentation. I took the file folder from my purse. Its contents, which had once felt like a shield, now felt like a sword. I laid each document out on the polished surface of the desk, arranging them like a general laying out battle plans. Exhibit A, the initial booking confirmation. It clearly stated my name as the sole reservation holder for all 5 suites. Exhibit B, my credit card statements, with the 50% deposit and the final payment circled in red ink. The numbers were stark, irrefutable. Paid in full. Helen Parker. Exhibit C, the receipt from the jeweler in Columbus. A small, flimsy piece of paper that represented the sale of my past, the liquidation of my love for Robert. It felt radioactive to the touch. Exhibit D, the printout of my savings account, showing the withdrawal that had nearly emptied it. I smoothed each paper flat, my mind a cold, clear machine. This wasn't just a collection of receipts anymore. This was a narrative. This was the story of my sacrifice, told in the unforgiving language of finance. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was a cascade of notifications, one after another. Maya. She had been ruthlessly efficient. My screen filled with the screenshots she had sent. I scrolled through them, and this time, the emotional impact was gone. I was no longer reading them as a wounded mother. I was reading them as a prosecutor. What mom doesn't know won't hurt her. Let's just, not telling her where we're going. She'll probably just pay it without making a scene. She always does. Shift our rooms over to our cards, she's left with just her room charge. Every message was a nail in their coffin. I plugged my phone into my laptop, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I downloaded every screenshot. I created a new folder on my desktop and named it Evidence. I saved each image, numbering them in chronological order. I then uploaded the entire folder to a secure cloud server and emailed a password-protected link to my own email address. Redundancy. I was creating a fortress of facts, a digital paper trail that could not be denied, erased, or gaslighted away. As I worked, the parallel performance of our family life continued, a grotesque parody playing out in real time. My phone buzzed with a notification from the public family group chat. The one where I still existed as mom. It was a photo, posted by Jessica. It was a selfie of her and Michael, their faces artfully arranged in front of the resort's main pool. They were both smiling, their teeth impossibly white against their pale, Ohio skin. Jessica was wearing a floppy hat and oversized sunglasses. Michael had his arm draped casually around her. They looked like the stars of a pharmaceutical commercial, selling the dream of a happy, carefree life. The caption read, "We made it to paradise. Can't thank you enough, Helen, for making this happen. The kids are already in the water. Wish you were here. Wish you were here." The lie was so brazen, so utterly devoid of shame, it was almost a work of art. They were, at that very moment, executing the first part of their plan. To keep me away from their activities. While I was in my room documenting their conspiracy, they were performing the role of the grateful children for a public audience of one. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. The old Helen would have replied with something cheerful and self-effacing. "Oh, you kids go on and have fun. I'm just unpacking. I'll see you at dinner." She would have played her part in their farce. I typed nothing. My silence, I realized, was a new and powerful weapon. Let them wonder. Let them feel the small, gnawing unease of an unanswered message. Another buzz. This time, from the secret thread, a screenshot forwarded by Maya before she, presumably, muted it forever. The timing was almost comical. Lauren, did anyone see if she got the keys? Michael, yeah, she was at the desk when I left. She'll figure it out. Jess just posted the thank you pic. Everyone remember to like it. Jessica, ugh, this is exhausting. I need a margarita. Is everyone agreed on the fancy oceanfront place for dinner? Let's make the reservation for 7. I'll just text the main chat and act like it was a spontaneous idea. They weren't just plotting, they were choreographing. Every interaction was scripted. Every kind word was a strategic move. They were running a covert operation, and I was the target. I looked at the portfolio of keycards still sitting on the desk. Room 801, Michael and Jessica. Room 802, Lauren and David. Room 804, Daniel and his family. Room 805, the older grandkids. And my room, 803, the command center. They had left me holding all the power, and they were too arrogant, too blinded by their own narrative of my weakness, to even realize it. They assumed I would dutifully distribute the keys, the final act of my function as their travel agent and financier. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. It felt strange, like a muscle I hadn't used in a very long time. They thought they were in control. They thought their secret chat was their private war room. But they had a leak. Their intelligence was compromised. And I was now 5 steps ahead of them. I picked up the phone and dialed the front desk. Chloe, please. This is Helen Parker in Suite 803. Of course, Mrs. Parker. How can I help you? Her voice was warm and professional. Chloe, I seem to have misplaced the rest of my family, I said, allowing a note of grandmotherly befuddlement into my voice. It was a role I could still play when it suited my purpose. My son, Michael Parker, and my daughter, Lauren Miller. Are they by the pool, by any chance? Could you possibly page them and let them know their mother has their room keys at the front desk? I can certainly do that, Mrs. Parker, she said kindly. Thank you, dear. I'll leave them here with you. Just have them show their ID. I hung up. I placed the 4 remaining keycards back into the elegant portfolio. I would walk them down to the front desk myself. Let them be summoned from their poolside paradise. Let them be forced to come to the desk, like supplicants, to show their identification to claim the rooms they believed were theirs. It was a small move, a minor assertion of control, but it was the first move. It was a way of saying, I am the gatekeeper. Nothing happens here without me. The wounded woman who had entered this room an hour ago was gone. The shock had given way to strategy. The pain had been transmuted into purpose. I was no longer reeling, I was reloading. I looked at my reflection in the dark screen of the television. My face was calm, my eyes were clear. The pale blue dress no longer looked like a costume for a victim, it looked like a uniform. They had drawn the battle lines in a secret chat. They had planned their attack with mocking disdain. They thought they were unshakable. But I had their playbook. I had the receipts. And they had absolutely no idea who they were dealing with anymore. Walking out of my suite, the 4 keycard portfolios in my hand, I felt a profound shift in my own gravity. I was no longer being pulled along by their whims. I was exerting my own small, deliberate force. The walk to the elevator, the ride down to the lobby, it was all accomplished with a newfound sense of purpose. I was no longer a guest. I was the proprietor of this whole elaborate, expensive sham, and I was beginning to learn the quiet art of management. At the front desk, I found Chloe and gave her my most practiced, slightly dotty grandmother smile. So sorry to be a bother, dear, I said, placing the portfolios on the counter. My children seem to have misplaced me. When they come for their keys, Could you please hold these for them? They'll have their IDs. Chloe was the model of professional discretion, but I saw a flicker of understanding or perhaps pity in her eyes. Of course, Mrs. Parker. We'll take care of it. I retreated to a plush armchair in a quiet corner of the lobby, shielded by a large potted palm, and waited. It didn't take long. Less than 10 minutes later, I heard the faint, disembodied voice of the resort's PA system, a smooth, generic female tone that somehow managed to sound both apologetic and firm. Michael Parker, Lauren Miller, please see the front desk. Michael Parker, Lauren Miller. From my vantage point, I had a perfect view. I saw Michael stride in from the pool area, his hair damp, a towel slung around his neck. His face, which had been relaxed and carefree in Jessica's selfie, was now tight with annoyance. He was a man who was not used to being summoned. Lauren followed a few steps behind, her expression a mirror of her brother's irritation. They approached the desk, their body language radiating impatience. I couldn't hear their words, but I could see the pantomime clearly. Michael spoke, gesturing impatiently. Chloe replied with a professional smile, pointing to the keycard portfolios on the counter. She said something that made Michael's posture stiffen. He reached for his wallet. Lauren, seeing this, began rummaging through her beach tote. The simple, frictionless entry to paradise they had expected had hit its first small snag. They had been forced to prove who they were. It was a minuscule assertion of my control, a bureaucratic whisper that said, "You are here because I allow it." It was nothing to them, a momentary hassle. But to me, it was everything. It was the first shot fired in a war they didn't even know had been declared. They took their keys and left without a word, their backs rigid with indignation. I waited a few more minutes, then returned to the quiet sanctuary of my room, the first skirmish won. A few hours later, my phone buzzed with the summons to dinner. It was from the public chat, a breezy message from Jessica. Oceanfront Grill at 7? Spontaneous thought. First vacation dinner. The lie was so effortless, so practiced. I thought of the screenshot from the secret chat. I'll just text the main chat and act like it was a spontaneous idea. They were all such talented actors. They deserved an award. I took my time getting ready. I chose a simple navy blue dress, elegant and understated. I put on a string of pearls Robert had given me on our 25th anniversary. They felt cool and solid against my skin, a tangible link to a time when love wasn't a transaction. When I looked in the mirror, I saw not a victim, but a woman girding herself for battle. Calm, composed, unbreakable. The oceanfront grill was exactly what you'd expect. Tiki torches, the gentle sound of waves washing against the shore, and tables filled with families performing their own versions of happiness. I saw them at a large round table near the railing, a perfect, postcard setting. They were already there, laughing at something Michael was saying. As I approached, the laughter died. A subtle, almost imperceptible shift occurred. Their smiles became a little more fixed, their postures a little more rigid. I was the unexpected variable, the problem to be managed, arriving at their perfectly scripted scene. "Mom," Michael said, his voice a little too loud, a little too hearty. "There you are. We were just getting started." "It looks lovely," I said, taking the empty seat they had left for me between Sophie and Liam. It was a strategic placement, I realized. The grandmother, buffered by the children, less able to engage in adult conversation. Maya was seated across from me, next to her father. She gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod, her eyes conveying a silent message of solidarity. She was my witness. My quiet ally. The waiter arrived, a young man with a tan and an easy smile. "Good evening. Can I get you started with something from our wine list?" Before I could even open my mouth, Michael picked up the leather-bound list. He didn't glance at the prices. He didn't consult anyone. He simply pointed. "We'll start with a bottle of the Silver Oak. Napa Cabernet." I knew that wine. Robert and I had shared a bottle once, on a very special anniversary. It was an expensive, celebratory wine. It was not a casual, first night of vacation wine. A quick glance at the menu a few feet away confirmed my memory. $250 a bottle. It was a power play. A deliberate act of casual, profligate consumption on my dime. It was a way of establishing the terms of this vacation from the outset. We are here to indulge, and you are here to pay for it. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Mike, that's a little steep, isn't it? Michael waved a dismissive hand, not even looking at his brother. He smiled directly at me, a wide, predatory grin. It's a celebration. We're all together. And besides, he added, his voice dripping with a false, cloying affection, Grandma's treating. He winked. The entire table looked at me, their expressions a mixture of expectation and entitlement. They were waiting for me to play my part. To smile, to blush a little, and to say, of course, dear. Anything for my family. I held their gazes for a moment, letting the silence stretch. Then, I smiled. A calm, serene, utterly unreadable smile. It's a special occasion, indeed, I said, my voice smooth as silk. I did not protest, I did not object. I simply agreed, and in my agreement, I let them think they had won. Let them drink their expensive wine. Let them rack up the bill. It was all just more evidence for the file. Every extravagant charge was another nail. The dinner proceeded along the same lines. They ordered with abandon. Appetizers for the table, the most expensive entrees lobster, filet mignon. The children were encouraged to order whatever they wanted from the adult menu. And when it came time for dessert, Jessica clapped her hands together like a delighted child. We have to get one of everything and share. Grandma won't mind, will you, Grandma? Not at all, I said, taking a slow sip of water. I was a serene, benevolent goddess of finance, silently approving their sacrifices at my altar. They talked around me, their conversation a blur of work complaints, neighborhood gossip, and plans for the week, plans that, I noted, never included me. They talked about chartering a fishing boat, about a day trip to a theme park, about the spa treatments Jessica had already booked. I was an invisible presence, a ghost at the feast, there only to sign the check. And then came the second move of the evening. Michael leaned forward, dabbing his mouth with a napkin. Mom, he said, his tone casual, almost an afterthought. The front desk was a little weird today. Could you give me and Jess an extra key card to your room? You know, just for emergencies. In case you lock yourself out or we can't get a hold of you. The request was so smooth, so reasonable on the surface. But I knew what it was. It was an attempt to gain access. A foothold. A way to breach the small amount of privacy and control I had. An emergency key meant they could enter my room when I wasn't there. An emergency key meant I was never truly secure. The entire table fell quiet again, watching me. This was another test. I placed my water glass down with a soft click. I looked at Michael, my smile unwavering. Oh, you don't need to worry about that for a second, sweetheart, I said, my voice full of warmth and reassurance. I've got it all covered. If there's any emergency, you just call the front desk, and they'll take care of everything. That's what they're there for. I did not raise my voice. I did not refuse him directly. I simply handled it. I absorbed his request and nullified it with a wave of pleasant, grandmotherly competence. I wrapped my refusal in the language of care. His smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. A flicker of confusion, of frustration, crossed his face. He had expected me to either comply immediately or to become flustered and argue, which he could then frame as me being difficult. He was not prepared for a calm, logical, and utterly final denial. Right, he said, clearing his throat. Of course, just a thought. He took a large gulp of his expensive wine. Across the table, Maya was looking down at her plate, but I saw the ghost of a smile on her lips. She had seen it. She had understood exactly what had just happened. A small, invisible line had been drawn in the sand, and Michael had been gently but firmly pushed back behind it. When the check came, the waiter placed it, as expected, directly in front of me. It was a staggering amount. I didn't flinch. I took out my credit card, the same one that held the full weight of the reservation, and placed it in the leather folder. As I signed the slip, I felt a strange sense of power. This piece of plastic in my hand was not a symbol of my victimhood. It was my weapon. They thought they were draining my resources, but they were wrong. They were arming me. Each lavish, entitled purchase was another round of ammunition. And I had a full magazine. As we walked away from the table, Jessica slung her arm through Michael's. That was a perfect first night, she sighed contentedly. I walked a few paces behind them, next to Maya. The warm, salt-scented breeze blew in from the ocean. The tiki torches cast long, dancing shadows on the path. "Are you okay, Grandma?" Maya asked, her voice low. I looked at her worried, intelligent face. "Maya," I said, and my voice was no longer the performance of the serene grandmother, but the quiet, firm voice of the real Helen. "I have never been better." And I meant it. The wound was still there, a deep, dark hole in my heart. But tonight, for the first time, I had started to build a fortress around it. They had made their move. And I had made my first counter. They hadn't noticed it, not really. They had just felt a small, unexpected moment of resistance. But it was a start. And I was just getting warmed up. The walk back to the elevators was a study in contrasts. My children and their spouses were buoyant, their voices loud and their laughter echoing in the warm night air. They were flush with expensive wine and the smug satisfaction of a plan they believed was proceeding flawlessly. They chattered about their plans for the next day, a morning at the beach, an afternoon of shopping with the easy arrogance of people who have never had to consider the cost of their own leisure. I was a silent, trailing presence, a shadow they had already forgotten. But the silence in my mind was not one of defeat. It was the focused, humming silence of a machine spooling up to full power. The dinner had been a reconnaissance mission. I had observed their tactics, confirmed their strategy, and executed my first, subtle counter-maneuver. Now, back in the quiet sanctuary of Suite 803, it was time to move from defense to offense. It was time to lock down the paper trail and build my fortress wall by wall. The children, lulled into a false sense of security by my passive compliance at dinner, would be sleeping soundly, dreaming of their inheritance. I, however, had never felt more awake. I sat at the desk, the soft glow of my laptop screen illuminating my face, the sound of the distant waves a rhythmic, soothing backdrop to my work. It was time to make the calls. Call number 1, the bank. My hands were steady as I dialed the 24-hour fraud prevention line for my credit card. I knew the number by heart. It was printed on the back of the card that had become the central weapon in this unfolding war. After navigating the automated menu, a calm, professional voice came on the line. "This is David in the Fraud and Disputes Department. How can I help you tonight?" I took a deep breath. "Hello, David. My name is Helen Parker. I'm not calling to report a fraudulent charge. I'm calling to preempt a fraudulent dispute." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear him shifting gears, moving from his standard script to a place of genuine curiosity. "Okay, Mrs. Parker. Can you explain the situation for me?" I laid it out, my voice even and dispassionate, like a police officer giving a witness statement. I explained that I was on a large family vacation for which I was the sole cardholder of record. I explained that all charges for the resort, the booking, the food, the incidentals were legitimate and authorized by me. And then, I delivered the crucial piece of information. "I have reason to believe," I said, choosing my words with care, "that members of my party may attempt to dispute the charges for their specific rooms after we check out. They may claim the charges were unauthorized or a result of a booking error. I am calling tonight to state for the record, in a call that I know is being recorded, that any and all charges from the Golden Palms Resort between today's date and our checkout date are fully authorized by me. I want a note placed on my account to that effect immediately." David was silent for a moment. I heard the soft, rapid clicking of his keyboard. "I see, Mrs. Parker. That's a unique situation." "I'm a unique woman," I said, a hint of dry humor in my voice. "I also want to be clear about something else. Should a dispute be filed by a third party, I want the bank's official position to be that the charges will remain valid unless I, the primary cardholder, personally validate the dispute. I will not be held financially responsible for chargeback fees or other penalties resulting from a bad faith claim made by someone who is not a signatory on my account." I was speaking a language I didn't even know I knew. It was a language of corporate self-preservation, a dialect of fine print and liability. It was the language of a world my children inhabited with ease, a world where relationships were governed by terms and conditions. I was learning to speak it fluently. More clicking. "Okay, Mrs. Parker. I've placed a detailed, high-priority note on your account. It's time, stamped and linked to this call. Any dispute flags related to this merchant will be immediately escalated to a senior analyst and cross-referenced with this note. You've been very clear." "Thank you, David," I said. "You've been very helpful. Is there anything else I can assist you with?" "No," I said, a feeling of grim satisfaction settling over me. "That's all for tonight." I hung up the phone. The first wall of my fortress was now in place. Jessica's brilliant plan to shift our rooms over to our cards and leave me with the bill had just collided with a firewall of corporate bureaucracy. They could try to dispute the charges, but their claim would land in a file already marked with a red flag, a flag I had planted myself. They were playing checkers, and I was learning to play chess. Call number 2, the hotel front desk. My next call was internal. I dialed 0 for the operator. "Front desk, this is Kevin. How may I help you?" The voice was young, tinged with the weariness of a late-night shift. "Hello, Kevin. This is Helen Parker in Suite 803. I have a rather sensitive security request, and I'm hoping you can help me." I used the same calm, authoritative tone. I explained that I was the payer of record for a large family group occupying 5 suites. I mentioned that there had been some confusion earlier in the day regarding the keys. "I need to add a security note to the entire reservation," I stated, not asked. "Effective immediately, no changes of any kind are to be made to the booking without my physical presence and a photo ID. This includes, but is not limited to, checking out, changing the payment method, or issuing additional keycards. The authorization must come from me, Helen Parker, and no one else. Is that understood?" Kevin, like David at the bank, was momentarily taken aback. Yes, ma'am, I can do that. So, just to be clear, even if your son, for example, comes down and..." I cut him off, my voice polite but firm. "Even if my son comes down. Even if my daughter comes down. The only person authorized to alter this reservation in any way is the person whose name is on the credit card that paid for it. That person is me." "Okay. Got it," he said, his voice now more alert. I heard him typing. "I'm putting a pop-up alert on the master file for the Parker block. It will have to be acknowledged by a manager before any changes can be processed. It's locked." "Thank you, Kevin," I said. "I appreciate your discretion." I hung up. The second wall was complete. The physical gates of the hotel were now secured. They could no longer manipulate the front desk staff or exploit any potential confusion. They were, in effect, tenants in a property I controlled completely. Their access was provisional, their stay contingent on my approval. They just didn't know it yet. Call number 3, the family attorney. This was the final and most difficult call. It was one thing to outmaneuver my children with corporate policy, it was another to bring in the law. But their actions, as detailed in the screenshots now saved on my laptop, had escalated this beyond a simple family squabble. This was calculated, premeditated, and, I was beginning to suspect, illegal. James Whittaker had been our family's lawyer for 30 years. He had handled the closing on our house, drafted Robert's will, and offered me quiet, gentle advice after he passed. He was a good man, a relic from a time when a handshake and your word meant something. I hated to bring this ugliness to his door. But I was no longer operating from a place of sentiment. I was operating from a place of necessity. I left him a message on his emergency line, knowing it would be forwarded to his cell phone. I kept it brief. James, it's Helen Parker. I apologize for the late hour, but I'm in a difficult situation and I need your immediate counsel. It concerns a matter of potential financial abuse. Please call me back at your earliest convenience. The phrase financial abuse felt heavy and ugly in my mouth. But it was the correct term. They were not just being ungrateful children. They were adults conspiring to defraud their elderly mother, calling it what it was felt like a crucial step. To my surprise, he called back in less than 15 minutes. His voice was thick with sleep, but instantly alert. Helen, are you all right? What's happened? I spent the next 20 minutes laying out the entire story, from Michael's honeyed phone call to the secret group chat, my voice a low, steady monotone. I relayed the details of their plan to dump the bill on me, their mockery, their deceptions. I read some of the messages to him verbatim. As I spoke, the silence on his end of the line was profound. When I finally finished, he let out a long, slow breath. My God, Helen, he said, the sleepiness in his voice completely gone, replaced by a cold, professional anger. This is egregious. This isn't just bad behavior. This is textbook elder financial abuse, with elements of wire fraud, given that they used electronic messages to coordinate the conspiracy. The legal terms were jarring, but they were also validating. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't being dramatic. I was a victim of a calculated crime. What do I do, James? I asked. You've already done more than most people would have, he said, a note of admiration in his voice. Documenting everything was brilliant. The calls to the bank and the hotel were exactly the right moves. You've established a clear, contemporaneous record of your intent and actions. Now, we add another layer. Gone. He continued, his voice now the familiar, reassuring tone of a lawyer taking control. I want you to write a sworn statement. A declaration. Detail everything you just told me. Start with the date Michael called you. End with what you discovered today. Be specific. Name names. Reference the screenshots. I'm going to email you a template right now. You'll write it tonight, while it's fresh. In the morning, you will find a notary public. The hotel should have one and you will sign it in their presence. That document will become a legally binding affidavit. It transforms your story from an accusation into evidence. A sworn statement. The words had a solemn, almost sacred weight. This was the final wall of my fortress. It was a wall of legal truth, notarized and undeniable. If they try to fight you on this, Helen, James said, his voice grim. If they try to sue you or claim you've acted in bad faith, we will present this affidavit. We will subpoena their phone records. We will depose every last one of them. Believe me when I tell you, they have no idea the hornet's nest they are about to kick. After we hung up, I sat in the silent room for a long time. The calls were made. The wheels were in motion. I had built a fortress of paper and policy around myself, and it was impregnable. The wounded, heartbroken woman who had arrived in this lobby just this afternoon was gone. In her place was a strategist, a fighter, a woman who had finally learned the brutal, necessary art of self-preservation. I turned back to my laptop. The email from James was already there, the template for the affidavit attached. I opened a new document, and under the soft, forgiving glow of the desk lamp, with the sound of the eternal ocean in the background, I began to write my truth. I didn't sleep. Sleep was a luxury for a future I hadn't yet secured. Instead, I wrote. The legal template James Whittaker had sent was a stark, impersonal skeleton, but I fleshed it out with the raw, painful truth of the past 6 weeks. Each sentence was a carefully laid brick in the wall of my affidavit. I detailed Michael's call, his honeyed, manipulative tone. I documented the sale of my wedding ring, the exact amount I had received from the jeweler. I described the long nights spent sewing, the cold walks to the grocery store, the deliberate chill of my apartment. I transcribed the most damning messages from the secret group chat, each one a testament to their calculated betrayal. She'll probably just pay it without making a scene. She always does. Typing out the words, divorcing them from the emotional shock and viewing them as simple, factual evidence, was a strangely empowering act. I was no longer the subject of their mockery, I was the archivist of their downfall. I wrote until the first pale, gray light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, painting the calm surface of the Gulf of Mexico in shades of lavender and steel. When I was finished, I had a 6-page, single-spaced document that was as cold, hard, and irrefutable as a block of granite. It was the story of their crime, told in my voice, under penalty of perjury. At exactly 8 a.m., before the rest of my family had likely even stirred from their complimentary high thread count sheets, I made my next call. "Good morning, Golden Palms Resort, this is the concierge. How may I assist you?" "Good morning," I said, my voice crisp and professional. "My name is Helen Parker. I am a guest in Suite 803. I require 2 things this morning. First, I need to schedule an urgent meeting with the general manager of the hotel. Please inform him it is a matter concerning a significant financial and security issue with a multi-room booking. Second, I will require the services of a notary public to be present at that meeting. Can you please arrange both for 9 a.m.? The request was unusual, and I could hear the concierge's slight hesitation, but my tone brooked no argument. It was the voice of a woman who was not to be trifled with. "I will see what I can do, Mrs. Parker. Please hold." A few minutes later, he returned to the line, his voice now imbued with a new level of deference. "Mrs. Parker, the hotel manager, Mr. Collins, can see you at 9:30 inches his office. A notary will be present. Will that be acceptable?" "Perfectly," I said. "Thank you." I spent the next hour preparing. I showered and dressed in the same simple, navy blue dress from the night before. I pulled my hair back into a neat, severe bun. Every aspect of my appearance was designed to project an aura of calm, serious authority. I was not a hysterical old woman. I was a formidable business partner about to discuss the terms of our ongoing relationship. I printed 2 copies of my sworn statement and placed them in a crisp manila folder along with the hotel confirmation and the paid-in-full invoice. At 9:25, I walked out of my room and took the elevator down to the administrative offices. Ethan Collins was a man in his late 40s, with a perfectly tailored suit, a warm, professional tan, and the kind of practiced, reassuring smile that could diffuse any situation. He was the face of corporate competence. His office was an oasis of calm plush carpets, dark wood, and a large window overlooking the resort's perfectly manicured gardens. A woman in a sharp business suit, the notary, was already seated in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. "Mrs. Parker," he said, rising to greet me, his hand outstretched. "I'm Ethan Collins. Thank you for meeting with me. Please, have a seat. This is Miss Albright." I shook his hand, my grip firm and steady. "Mr. Collins, thank you for your time. This is a delicate matter, and I appreciate your discretion." I sat down and got straight to the point. There was no small talk. There was no preamble. I slid 1 copy of my affidavit and the booking confirmations across the polished expanse of his desk. "Mr. Collins," I began, my voice even and low, "I am the sole payer of record for a block of 5 suites at your resort, reservation number 74B32. As you can see from the invoice, that reservation is paid in full by my personal credit card. Last night, I became aware of a conspiracy among the other members of my party, my adult children, to defraud both myself and your hotel. His professional smile didn't falter, but I saw his eyes sharpen with a new, intense focus. He picked up the documents and began to read. I continued, laying out the facts with the same dispassionate clarity I had used in the affidavit. They have a documented plan to individually dispute the charges for their rooms with their credit card companies after checkout, claiming the charges were unauthorized. This would leave me, and by extension, your establishment, in a protracted and costly chargeback battle. Furthermore, they are treating the property in those rooms as their own, and I have reason to believe they may incur significant incidental charges which they have no intention of paying. I let that sink in. I was no longer just a wronged mother, I was a proactive business partner, alerting him to a potential financial threat against his hotel. I had framed the problem not as my problem, but as our problem. Ethan Collins read in silence for several minutes. He read every word of my sworn statement, his expression growing more grim with each page. He occasionally glanced up at me, a new, profound respect dawning in his eyes. He was no longer looking at a confused, elderly guest. He was looking at a woman who had meticulously built a legal case and brought it to his doorstep. When he finished, he placed the papers neatly back on his desk and folded his hands. The practiced smile was gone, replaced by a look of serious, focused concern. "Mrs. Parker," he said, and his voice had lost its smooth corporate veneer. It was direct and sincere. "First, let me say that I am appalled at what you are being subjected to. Second, thank you for bringing this to my attention directly. You are correct, this is a serious security and financial issue. The hotel's position is clear, you are the client, the reservation is yours. Your authority is absolute." The words were a balm to my raw, wounded soul. "Your authority is absolute. Now," he said, leaning forward, "all business. Tell me what you would like to do." This was the moment. The culmination of all my planning. My voice did not tremble. "My family is currently enjoying the amenities of your resort, amenities for which I have paid. I do not wish to create a public scene. I wish to handle this with the same quiet, ruthless efficiency they have demonstrated in their own planning. I need to know my rights as the payer of record. Can I modify the reservation? Can I shorten their stay? Can I cancel specific rooms?" He didn't hesitate. "Yes, to all of it. As the sole guarantor of the booking, you can modify it in any way you see fit. You can check any or all of them out at a moment's notice. Depending on the timing, there may be early departure penalties as per our booking policy, but any remaining balance for unused nights would, of course, be refunded to your card." "That's all I need to know," I said. I turned to the notary. "Miss Albright, I am ready to sign my statement." Glows. I took out my pen, Robert's old fountain pen, which I had brought for this specific purpose, and signed my name at the bottom of both copies of the affidavit. My signature was firm and clear. Miss Albright then signed and embossed both documents with her official seal, transforming my story into an unassailable legal fact. I kept one copy, the other I pushed back across the desk to Ethan Collins. "For your files," I said. "So that the hotel's actions are fully protected and justified." Gwode. He took it with a solemn nod. He understood. This document indemnified him. It was my authorization, my command. "Now," I said, turning back to him, "let's discuss the timeline. I want to execute a sequence of events. There will be no warning." Ethan Collins leaned forward, a pen in his hand, a look of grim fascination on his face. He was no longer just a hotel manager. He was my co-conspirator. "I'm listening," he said. At exactly 10 a.m., I began. "I want the key cards for suites 801, 802, 804, and 805 to be remotely deactivated. All of them." He jotted it down. 10 a.m. Deactivate keys. At 11 a.m., After they have had an hour to discover their keys no longer work and have likely congregated in the lobby in a state of confusion, I want a member of your guest services staff to approach each primary occupant, Michael Parker, Lauren Miller, and Daniel Parker, and politely, discreetly, hand them a formal, printed notice. The notice will state that their reservation has been cancelled by the cardholder on file, effective immediately. He wrote again. 11 a.m. Formal notices. They will be given until noon to vacate the rooms. At 12:30 p.m., I will require a taxi to be waiting at the main entrance. A large, comfortable taxi. With 2 seats. He looked up, a flicker of a smile touching his lips for the first time. 12:30 p.m. Taxi, 2 seats. Very good, Mrs. Parker, he said, a note of genuine admiration in his voice. The sequence is logged. I will personally oversee the execution. I stood up, my business concluded. I placed my notarized copy of the affidavit back in its folder. I was no longer just a mother. I was a client. I was a commander. And I had just given the order to launch a full-scale, coordinated, and devastating counterattack. I shook his hand again. Thank you for your assistance, Mr. Collins. Quote. The pleasure, he said, with a sincerity that I knew was real, was all mine. As I walked out of his office and back into the sun-drenched, oblivious paradise of the resort, I checked my watch. It was 9:55 a.m. The countdown had begun. I did not go to the lobby to watch. That would have been the act of a woman seeking validation, a woman who needed to witness the immediate fruits of her vengeance. My actions were no longer about vengeance. They were about reclamation. This was not a spectacle for my entertainment. It was a quiet, necessary, and long, overdue corporate restructuring of my own life. Instead, I returned to Suite 803. I walked out onto the balcony, leaving the sliding glass door open behind me. The air was warm and soft, and the sound of the waves was a slow, steady rhythm, like the beating heart of the world. For the first time since I had arrived in this manufactured paradise, I actually saw it. I saw the impossible, shimmering turquoise of the water, the brilliant white of the sand, the graceful, hypnotic dance of the palm trees in the breeze. It was beautiful, and for the first time, it felt like it belonged to me, because my enjoyment of it was no longer contingent on the approval or company of others. I sat down in one of the comfortable wicker chairs and looked at my watch. It was 9:59 a.m. I imagined them, scattered across the resort, blissfully unaware. Michael and Jessica were probably at the adults-only pool, sipping cocktails they had charged to the room, smugly congratulating themselves on their cleverness. Lauren and her husband were likely at the beach cabana, complaining about the humidity and planning their early escape. Daniel, my kind but weak-willed Daniel, was probably trailing after his wife and Maya, trying to keep the peace. The older grandkids were, I was sure, still asleep, luxuriating in beds I had paid for. They were all orbiting in their own little universes of entitlement, secure in their belief that I was the fixed, silent, and ever-providing son. They had no idea their son was about to go supernova. My watch ticked over to 10 a.m. Somewhere, deep in the digital bowels of the hotel's reservation system, a switch was flipped. A line of code was executed. In that single, silent, electronic instant, 4 key cards, and by extension, 4 entire worlds of comfort and privilege, ceased to function. Nothing exploded, no alarms went off. It was a quiet, invisible, and absolutely devastating act of digital warfare. I took a slow, deep breath, the salt air filling my lungs. I felt no glee, no sadistic pleasure, just a profound, tectonic sense of rightness. The natural order of things, which had been inverted for so long, was finally, irrevocably, snapping back into place. I sat there, on my balcony, for the next hour. I did not check my phone. I did not call the front desk for an update. I let the process work. I had set the machine in motion, and I had faith in its cold, impartial efficiency. The system I had once railed against, the impersonal, bureaucratic machinery of the corporate world had become my greatest ally. It had no emotions. It felt no pity. It simply followed the instructions of the person who paid the bills. At around 10:45, the first tremors of the earthquake I had triggered reached me. My phone, which had been sitting silent on the small glass table beside me, began to buzz. It was the public family chat. "Michael, is anyone else's key not working? Jess and I are locked out." A moment later, "Lauren. Mine isn't working either. The light just keeps flashing red. So annoying." Then, a message from Daniel. "Daniel, ours too. Maybe their system is down? I'll go to the front desk." I read the messages, a clinical detachment settling over me. They were like dispatches from a foreign country, reports from a world that was no longer my concern. Their annoyance, their inconvenience, it was all utterly irrelevant to me. I watched them digitally scurry, like ants whose hill had been kicked, and I felt nothing. I placed the phone face down on the table. Their small, predictable chaos was just the overture. The real performance was about to begin. I looked at my watch. It was 10:59, right on schedule. Down in the lobby, which I could now picture with perfect clarity, my children would be congregating. They would be confused, irritated, and beginning to feel the first, unfamiliar prickles of genuine anxiety. Their sense of entitlement was so absolute that the simple failure of a plastic card to grant them access to a room they weren't paying for would feel like a profound personal injustice. Daniel, the designated peacemaker, would be at the counter, trying to reason with the staff. Michael would be standing behind him, radiating impatience, ready to demand a manager. Jessica and Lauren would be complaining loudly to each other, already formulating the scathing review they would post on TripAdvisor. And then, at exactly 11 a.m., I knew that a calm, impeccably dressed member of the guest services team, perhaps even Ethan Collins himself, would approach them. He would not engage with their anger. He would not be drawn into their drama. He would simply, politely, and with unassailable corporate authority, hand each of them a crisp, white envelope. I had helped Ethan draft the notice myself. It was a masterpiece of bland, corporate speak, designed to be both informative and utterly impenetrable to emotional appeal. "Dear Mr. Parker, please be advised that as of 11 a.m. on today's date, your reservation for Suite 801 at the Golden Palms Resort has been cancelled by the primary cardholder and guarantor of the booking, Miss Helen Parker. As per our reservation policy, you have until 12 p.m. to vacate the suite and remove all personal belongings. Our Bell staff is on standby to assist you with your luggage. We hope you have enjoyed your stay with us." There was no ambiguity. No room for argument. It was a simple statement of fact. A corporate execution, delivered with a polite smile. My phone began to vibrate with a frantic, unhinged intensity. It wasn't the gentle buzz of a group chat notification. It was a direct call. The screen lit up with Michael's name. I looked at it. I watched my son's name glow on the screen, a digital plea from a world I had just set on fire. The old Helen would have answered it, her heart pounding, ready to be screamed at, ready to absorb his rage, ready, perhaps, to even relent in the face of his anger. I pressed the silence button on the side of the phone. The screen went dark. Immediately, it lit up again. Lauren. I silenced her call, too. Then Daniel. Silence. Then Jessica. Silence. The calls stopped. The frantic, desperate attempts to reach their ATM, their eternal provider, their mom, had failed. They were cut off. For the first time in their adult lives, they were facing a problem that I was not going to solve. They had reached for the button they had been trained to press their entire lives, the one labeled "Mom will fix it," and for the first time, the button didn't work. The ensuing silence was more profound than the ringing. It was the silence of their utter shock and disbelief. The silence of a world turned upside down. I knew what would happen next. Their confusion would curdle into rage. Their rage would need a target, and since they could not reach me by phone, they would come to me in person. They would march to Suite 803, their faces contorted with righteous indignation, ready to kick down the door of the woman who had dared to defy them. I stood up from the balcony chair. I was not afraid, I was ready. I walked over to the desk and picked up the notarized copy of my affidavit. The paper felt heavy and powerful in my hand. It was my shield. It was my declaration of independence. I walked to the door of my suite and I did something I hadn't done in years. I drew the deadbolt and slid the security latch into place. It was a small, metallic click, but it resonated with a deep, symbolic power. The door was locked. The fortress was sealed. And I was safe inside. I waited. I knew they were coming. And when they arrived, I would be ready to present them with the bill for their own destruction, a bill written not in dollars, but in the undeniable, black and white truth of their own words. The switch had been flipped. The power was out. And they were about to find out what it was like to be left in the dark. The sound, when it came, was not a polite knock. It was a frantic, furious pounding, the sound of a fist hitting solid wood with a force meant to intimidate, to shatter, to breach. It was the sound of entitlement denied, a primal roar of disbelief translated into physical violence against my door. "Mom, open this door. What the hell is going on?" Michael's voice was a muffled shout, distorted by the wood and his own rage. It was not the voice of a son concerned for his mother. It was the voice of a king whose castle gates had been slammed in his face. I didn't move. I stood in the center of the room, my notarized affidavit held loosely in my hand, and I let him pound. I let the raw, impotent fury of his blows echo in the quiet, air-conditioned space. Each impact was a confirmation. Each shout was a validation of every decision I had made. "Helen, this isn't funny. Open the door right now." That was Jessica, her voice a shrill, sharp counterpoint to Michael's guttural rage. The false sweetness was gone, stripped away to reveal the raw, grasping avarice beneath. Then Lauren joined in, her voice trembling with a theatrical, victimized quaver. "Mom, what did you do? They're kicking us out. We have kids. What did you do?" The pounding continued, a desperate, chaotic rhythm of fists and fury. I wondered, with a sense of clinical detachment, if the other guests on the floor could hear, if they were pressing their ears to their own doors, listening to the messy, spectacular implosion of the Parker family. I let them exhaust themselves. I let their initial, explosive rage burn itself out against the unyielding reality of the locked door. Finally, the pounding subsided, replaced by a tense, ragged silence, punctuated by their heavy breathing. Only then did I move. I walked to the door, my steps measured and silent. I did not unlock the deadbolt. I did not slide the security latch. I simply looked through the peephole. Their faces were a grotesque, distorted tableau of outrage. Michael's face was red and blotchy, his hair disheveled. Jessica stood beside him, her arms crossed tightly, her perfectly made-up face a mask of cold fury. Lauren was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, a performance of distress for an audience that wasn't there. And behind them, looking pale and deeply uncomfortable, was Daniel. I spoke, my voice calm and clear, easily audible through the solid wood of the door. "Go away." The two words were a bucket of ice water on a grease fire. They were so unexpected, so utterly out of character for the woman they thought they knew, that it stunned them into a momentary silence. It was Michael who recovered first. "What did you say?" he snarled, his face pressing closer to the peephole, his eye a wild, disbelieving orb. "You open this door, Mom. We need to talk about this." "There is nothing to talk about," I replied, my voice as cold and hard as the marble floor in the lobby. "The hotel has provided you with your checkout time. I suggest you use the remaining minutes to pack." "You can't do this to us," Jessica shrieked, pushing Michael aside. "This is our vacation, you're ruining everything." "Your vacation," I said, the words dropping like stones into the tense silence, "was a fiction you created. I was merely the bank you intended to rob. Unfortunately for you, the bank is now closed. This, finally, seemed to penetrate their thick skulls of rage and entitlement. There was another brief, shocked silence. They were beginning to understand that they were not dealing with their mother anymore. They were dealing with a stranger. "Mom, please." Daniel's voice was pleading, desperate. He was always the negotiator, the one who tried to smooth the rough edges of his siblings' greed. "Just open the door. We can work this out. There's been a misunderstanding." "There has been no misunderstanding, Daniel," I said, and for the first time, I allowed a note of genuine sadness to enter my voice. "There has been a clarification." I walked away from the door and went to my desk. I picked up my phone. Lying beside it was the folder containing the screenshots from the secret group chat. The raw, unfiltered evidence of their betrayal. I walked back to the door. "You want to know what this is about?" I called out. "It's about this." I slid the first printed screenshot under the door. It was the one from Jessica, the one that had felt like a knife to the gut. "Can we agree on no guilt trips about family time? I need at least one day at the spa and a dinner without having to hear that story about the catfish again." I heard a sharp intake of breath from the other side. It was Jessica. "And this," I said. I slid another one under. It was Michael's reply to Daniel's feeble defense of me. "She's not footing the bill. She's booking it. Big difference. We'll pay her back. It's just easier to have one card on file." A low groan came from the hallway. "Daniel." "And this," I continued, my voice a relentless, emotionless monotone. "This is my personal favorite. The cornerstone of your entire plan." I slid the screenshot of Jessica's brilliant idea under the door. "Shift our rooms over to our cards? We can just say there was a mix-up. Then we check out, and she's left with just her room charge. She'll probably just pay it without making a scene. She always does." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a dense, heavy, suffocating silence. The silence of criminals caught red-handed, their secret plans laid bare on the cheap, patterned carpet of a hotel hallway. There was no more shouting, no more pounding. I had taken their rage and smothered it with the undeniable pillow of their own words. Finally, I slid my own notarized affidavit under the door. The full 6 pages of it. "And that," I said, my voice resonating with a final, unshakable authority, "is my response. It is a sworn, legal statement. I have already spoken with my bank, the hotel management, and my attorney. The call you are worried about is not the one to me. It's the one you might receive from him, regarding felony elder financial abuse. Now, as I said before, I suggest you pack." I walked away from the door. The confrontation was over. The battle was won. But then, a small, quiet knock came. It was so different from the earlier pounding that I almost didn't recognize it. It was hesitant, timid. "Grandma?" It was Maya. I hesitated for only a second. I unlatched the security lock, turned the deadbolt, and opened the door a crack. She was standing alone. The others had retreated down the hall, huddled together in a miserable, defeated clump, the damning printouts clutched in their hands. They were staring at me, their faces a mixture of hatred, fear, and disbelief. Maya's face was pale, and her eyes were shining with unshed tears. "I can't, I'm not staying with them," she whispered, her voice choked with a shame that rightfully belonged to her parents. Can I come with you?" Her question was a small, flickering candle in the vast darkness of their betrayal. She was the one good thing, the one person who had chosen decency over greed. Behind her, Daniel took a step forward. "Maya, get back here. We're a family." Maya turned, and for the first time, I saw the steel in her spine. "No," she said, her voice clear and strong. "We're not. Not like this. You read what you wrote. You all did. I'm not going to be a part of it." She turned back to me, her eyes pleading. I opened the door wider, but before I let her in, I knelt. It was an awkward, creaky gesture for a woman my age, but it was important. I knelt down to the level of my younger grandchildren, Sophie and Liam, who were standing there looking lost and terrified, their small faces streaked with tears. "This is not your fault," I said, my voice soft and gentle, a voice I hadn't used in what felt like a lifetime. "This is about grown-up things, grown-up mistakes. You are good, and you are loved. Never forget that." I stood up and looked at my children, at the wreckage of the family I had spent my life building. There was no triumph in my heart. Just a vast, quiet, and profound sadness. "I have an offer for you," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "It's the only one you're going to get. You will pack your bags. You will fund your own way from this point forward. You will not contact me. In return, I will not press charges." I looked at Michael, at Jessica, at Lauren, at Daniel. I saw the flicker of calculation in their eyes as they weighed the loss of a free vacation against the threat of a felony conviction. It was an easy choice for them. "Now get out of my hallway," I said. I stepped back into my room and held the door open for Maya. She slipped inside, clutching her small bag, and I closed the door on the family I once had. The final, heavy click of the lock was the sound of my old life ending, and a new one beginning. My taxi, the one with 2 seats, would be here soon. The silence inside Suite 803 was a living thing. It was not the empty, lonely silence of my apartment in Ohio. It was a rich, profound silence, filled with the weight of decisions made and boundaries drawn. Outside the door, the frantic, chaotic energy of my former family had evaporated, replaced by the hushed, urgent sounds of a forced retreat. I could hear the frantic zipping of suitcases, the muffled, angry whispers, the thin, reedy sound of Lauren trying to cry without making a noise. They were ghosts now, haunting a hallway that no longer belonged to them. Maya stood near the window, her back to me, looking out at the impossibly blue ocean. She was ramrod straight, a small, solitary soldier standing at attention after a brutal battle. She hadn't said a word since stepping into the room, and I knew she was wrestling with a tidal wave of emotions: shame, loyalty, grief, and a dawning, terrifying sense of righteousness. She had just divorced her own parents, and the aftershocks were still rattling her to the core. I didn't rush her. I didn't offer platitudes or easy reassurances. The greatest gift I could give her in that moment was the dignity of her own silence. Instead, I moved with a calm, quiet efficiency. I packed my own small suitcase, the shabby old bag that had seemed so pitiful just a day before. Now, it felt like the only honest piece of luggage in the entire resort. I folded my navy blue dress, the string of pearls, the pale blue dress of my initial, foolish hope. They were no longer costumes or armor. They were just clothes. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text message from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Ethan Collins. Your taxi is waiting for you at the main entrance whenever you are ready. I have taken the liberty of settling your final bill. There are no charges. Please consider your stay at the Golden Palms, however brief, a professional courtesy. It was a privilege to assist you." A small, genuine smile touched my lips. A professional courtesy. Collins was a man who understood the elegant, unspoken language of power and respect. He had witnessed a corporate restructuring, and he was saluting the new CEO. I texted back a simple reply. "Thank you, Mr. Collins. You run a fine establishment." "Maya," I said softly. She turned from the window. Her eyes were red-rimmed but clear. The tears had been fought back and defeated. "Yes, Grandma? Our car is here," I said. "Are you ready to go?" She nodded, a single, decisive jerk of her chin. "Yes." We walked out of the suite together. I did not lock the door behind me. There was nothing left in that room that belonged to me. We didn't look down the hall, where the doors to the other suites stood ajar, revealing glimpses of frantic, miserable packing. We walked straight to the elevators, our heads held high, our focus on the future, not the wreckage we were leaving behind. The elevator ride down was silent. As the doors opened onto the magnificent lobby, it felt like stepping onto a stage for the final act of a play. The air was cool, the fountain tinkled, and the sunlight streamed through the vast glass walls. It was the same scene of manufactured perfection I had arrived in a lifetime ago yesterday. But I was no longer an invisible, hopeful supplicant. I was a sovereign nation, with a population of 2, making a formal exit. A sleek, black taxi was waiting under the portico, its engine humming quietly. A bellhop, the same one who had unloaded Michael's car with such deference, rushed forward to take our bags. He treated my shabby suitcase and Maya's small duffel with the same care he would have given a set of Louis Vuitton trunks. Ethan Collins was a man who communicated his orders clearly. As we stepped out into the warm, humid air, a flurry of motion caught my eye. It was them. They were scrambling out of a side entrance, a miserable, disorganized herd of refugees, their arms laden with hastily packed bags. Michael was on his phone, his face a mask of frantic stress, undoubtedly trying to find last-minute lodging for a party of 10 on a busy weekend in a resort town. Jessica was trying to wrangle the younger, crying grandkids. Lauren was arguing with her husband. It was a scene of pure, unadulterated chaos, a chaos of their own making. They were a tableau of consequences. Stripped of their benefactor, they were revealed to be nothing more than a collection of spoiled, helpless, and deeply incompetent adults. They had mistaken my kindness for a lifeline, and now that I had withdrawn it, they were drowning. Our eyes met across the polished expanse of the circular driveway. Michael's gaze was a toxic cocktail of hatred and disbelief. Jessica's was pure, venomous fury. I looked back at them, and for the first time, I felt nothing. Not anger. Not sadness. Not even pity. It was the cool, dispassionate indifference one feels when looking at strangers. They had burned the bridge, dismantled it plank by plank, and now they were shocked to find themselves stranded on the other side of the chasm. The taxi driver held the door open for us. Maya slid in, and I followed, the cool leather of the seat a welcome comfort. As the car pulled away from the curb, I looked out the rear window. The last image I had of my family was of them standing on the sidewalk of Gulfview Boulevard, surrounded by a mountain of luggage, looking small and lost and utterly pathetic against the gleaming, indifferent facade of the Golden Palms Resort. They were shouting at each other, their gestures sharp and angry. The no-drama vacation had reached its logical, dramatic conclusion. The taxi turned, and they were gone. We drove in silence for a while, the palm trees and tourist shops of Clearwater Beach sliding past the window. Maya was still looking straight ahead, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Where are we going, Grandma?" she finally asked, her voice quiet. "Somewhere better," I said. I had made one final call from my room that morning. A small, boutique inn I had found online, nestled in the quiet, charming town of Dunedin, a few miles up the coast. It was the opposite of the Golden Palms in every way, small, intimate, and real. When we arrived, the owner, a woman with a warm smile and flower on her apron, greeted us by name. Our room was simple and clean, with a small balcony that overlooked the marina. It didn't have a fish tank or a spa or 5 different restaurants. But it was peaceful. It was ours. For the next 3 days, Maya and I lived a life of quiet, gentle simplicity. We took long walks on the beach, not the crowded, performative beach of the resort, but the wild, shell-strewn expanse of Honeymoon Island. We didn't talk about what had happened. There was no need. The shared, unspoken trauma was a bond between us, but we refused to let it be the centerpiece of our new relationship. Instead, we talked about everything else. She told me about the books she was reading, about her dream of becoming a marine biologist. She spoke with a fierce, intelligent passion that I realized her parents had likely never bothered to listen to. I, in turn, told her stories about her grandfather, about the man who had taught me that love was not about sacrifice, but about partnership. I told her about my life, not as Grandma, the family utility, but as Helen, a woman who had once had her own dreams and was, to her own surprise, beginning to have them again. We ate key lime pie at a small dockside cafe, the tart sweetness a perfect counterpoint to the salt in the air. We watched the dolphins play in the wake of the fishing boats. We sat on our balcony in the evenings, reading our books in a comfortable, companionable silence. On our last night, as we watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and pink, Maya finally spoke the words that had been hanging in the air between us. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly. "Doing what you did?" I thought about her question for a long time. I thought about the pain, the betrayal, the profound, soul-deep wound they had inflicted. I thought about the decades I had spent making myself smaller, quieter, more accommodating, all in the desperate hope of earning a love that should have been freely given. "No," I said, and the word was as solid and true as the ground beneath my feet. "I don't regret drawing the line. My only regret is that it took me 65 years to finally put myself first." Maya reached out and took my hand. Her hand was small and warm in my own, a link to a future I had not expected to have. In her eyes, I did not see a reflection of the doddering, inconvenient old woman her parents had tried to make me. I saw a hero. A woman who had faced down dragons and won. As we flew home to Ohio the next day, I looked down at the clouds from my window seat. I was not the same woman who had flown down. The wound was still there, a tender, scarred place in my heart. It would likely never fully heal, but it was no longer a gaping, bleeding thing that defined me. It was just a part of my story now, the chapter that had preceded my own liberation. My arc was complete. Wound. Awakening. Counterattack. And finally, this, a quiet, profound, and deeply satisfying self-release. I had no idea what my life would look like now. The family I had known was gone, shattered by their own greed. But I was not alone, and for the first time in a very, very long time, I was free. And that was a paradise no amount of money could ever buy. This story is a powerful reminder that kindness should never be mistaken for weakness, nor should love be treated as a transaction. Helen's journey shows that for years, her generosity was seen not as a gift, but as an obligation. It teaches us that setting firm boundaries is not an act of cruelty, but a necessary act of self-preservation. True respect cannot grow in the soil of entitlement. Ultimately, it's a testament that it is never too late to reclaim your power, demand your worth, and choose your own peace over the crushing weight of others' expectations. Now, if you liked this story, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me which part surprised you the most. Each subscription and comment from you is a great motivation for us to keep sharing more meaningful things in life. Thank you very much.